The population of Gaza Strip is 2.2 million people. 49% of them are women. And women in Gaza do not have access to hygiene water, to personal hygiene supplies, to menstrual supplies, to sanitary pads. They don't have access to all these things. And women now are simply exposed to psychological and physical health risks because there's no products to use during their periods. Women are shy to tell you this, but they don't have to be shy actually. The world is not shy to let us to death for 62 days now. So they don't have to be shy to tell you that there is no pads to use in Gaza and that there is a new suffering unlocked now. We're suffering from being hungry, from being thirsty.
Assalamu alaikum, live from Gaza. It's December the 7th, 2023, officially marking over 2 months since the start of the genocide and ethnic cleansing attempts against 2.3 million Palestinian citizens here, trying to force them after they forced their ancestors from the historical cities and towns in Palestine. Now they are trying to do the same against the people in Gaza Strip, in the future against the people in the West Bank, and slowly work towards the greater Israel that is being depicted on the Israeli flag, showing it start from the Nile River on the west to the Euphrates River in the east. However, the Palestinian people here remain steadfast on their land. They will not allow a repeat of 1948 and 1967. And with continued support of freedom-loving people all around the world, which has only magnified and increased, continue what you're doing. Continue to educate and learn about Islam, about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, its history. It didn't just start on October the 7th, it started many decades ago. Continue to learn about what Zionism is. Zionism is not equal to Judaism. Don't stop creating content on social media, liking, sharing, commenting. We are on the right side of history. You are spreading the truth. Do not stop. Continue to donate wisely. Talk to Palestinians that you trust on the ground. Last night we released a video on the different social platforms on a charity organization which you can donate directly to here. Second, demonstrate. Continue demonstrating all around the world. Don't stop. Keep up the momentum. It is changing things. Continue your boycotting. Look what happened to Starbucks. The stock fell by more than 10% yesterday. And the more these Zionist corporations release their annual and quarterly earnings, you will hear more about their downfalls as well. Don't stop lobbying the politicians. They are putting a lot of pressure right now in order to ensure that a ceasefire happens, all borders are open, and a free Palestine happens as soon as possible. We see you, we hear you, we love you. Please continue the great work you are doing. Inshallah, soon we will meet here in Gaza, we will meet in Jerusalem, we will meet you across all the free world together to spread light against all the political, economical, social and moral injustice that has engulfed us all. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ensure that you remain safe, ensure that you remain full of faith and taqwa. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Peace be upon you.
العودة إلى الشمال لدفن أشقائهم، آبائهم، أمهاتهم، خالاتهم، أقاربهم، أحبائهم.
زعلانين على حالنا، زعلانين على الأطفال اللي لما تسمع صوت القصف شو بيصير فيهم. هما مش حاسين بالأطفال شو بيصير فيهم لما يقعدوا يصرخوا، صوتهم بيكون أعلى من الصواريخ. بحب أقول يعني خلص مش
قصفوا دارنا واخواتي الاثنين تصابوا، واحد بايده 15 غرزه واحد براسه، وماما تصوت ببطنها وانقطع الامعاء عندها. انا كنت ببني على حلمي اني اطلع دكتوره، بطلت بدي اطلع دكتوره. بناشد كل العالم، كل العالم توقف معنا وتوقف مع كل واحد زينا. طلعنا من الدار وتشحوطنا واليهود وقفونا واخذوا ماما واخواتي، وماما هي بتنزف مش عارفين ايش نعمل. بنتمنى تخلص الحرب ونرجع دورنا، مع انه فيش لنا دور، خلص كله منقصف، بس ما نعرفش وين نروح بعد هيك. تشحوطنا وانا صغيره، يعني ما عشناش طفولتنا زي ما احنا كنا متخيلين. انا كنت متخيله نطلع دكاتره، نعالج الناس، نطلع كبار هيك زي باقي دول العالم. طب احنا ايش ذنبنا الاطفال هيك نعيش اللي برا بدول الاجانب واللي هنا وهنا عايشين الاطفال زي يعني باقي الناس، يعني عايشين عيشه حلوه كثير، اما احنا مش عايشين. بس
اخواتي كويسين،
كل اخواتك كويسين يا عمتي، كلهم كويسين يا عمتي. يا ورد علي يا عمتي، يا ورد علي يا عمتي. انت بخير يا عمتي، انت بخير يا عمتي، انت كويسه، انت كويسه يا عمتي، انت كويسه. يلا عشان اخذك واروح معاه. ورد علي يا عمتي، طلعت من عندكم عشان العمر يا عمتي.
عاجز اللسان عن النطق بالاجابه.
الحمد لله على سلامتك يا عم، انت كويسه
انت عمتها اخت ابوها؟
فيش فيها، فيش فيك ولا شيء، بدي اخذكم واروح فيكم يا عمتي. طيب طيب ما تزعليش يا عمتي، تزعليش يا روحي.
الشاب تحمل.
الله ونعم الوكيل. أنا كان السبب في الحرب.
4 أيام ما أكلتيش ها؟
خلصت؟ مش لازم تقولها؟
تمام؟
عم كساب
ماليش دخل ولا اصحاب حال، بس شباب الشارع.
اسمي ماريا أحمد أبو صافي. اتحصرت 4 أيام من دون ولا أكل ولا شرب تحت الردم والحجار، وكانت الحيطة كتير قريبة. كان المكان ضيق كتير كتير، يعني أختي كانت رجلها تنتهي معلقات، صرت تصوت، كانت تطلع من رجلها حجار، كانت تطلع، كان محاصر رجلها صندوقين. قعدت 3 أيام، واليوم فكت رجلها الثانية. أول إشي فكت رجلها الأولى، بعدين فكت الرجل الثانية. امبارح فكت الرجل الثانية أظن. فكت رجلها الثانية انبسطت، صارت الفرحة إنه أول مرة فكت رجلها. وصارت بالليل، امبارح بالليل صارت تقول رجلي بتوجعني، رجلي محاصرة، عشان أنا مش طايلاها ولا يعني مش قادرة. يعني هذه كنت أقولها من الوجع، هي كانت تتوجع، كنت أقرأ عليها قرآن، كنت أعلي صوتي وأسمع صوت الدبابات، أوطي بلاش يجوا عنا تخطخ علينا. سمعت صوت الدبابة تخطخ، كان قريب، حسيته في الفقاسة.
ولا دقيق ولا بنزين ولا غاز، كيف قادرين يدبروا حياتهم؟
إن رب الله موجود، هو الرزاق، ما فيش مشكلة. يقصفوا يدمروا يضربوا، اللي بموت شهيد الله يرحمه، اللي بعيش حيواصل المشوار وحيكمل المشوار، وهم إلى زوال ونحن باقون.
We know that it's very bleak, it's very dark. There's no way out. If there's no water, there is no way out of Gaza. What should we do? Like drown? Like commit mass suicide? Is this what Israel wants? And we're not going to do that. And I was telling some friend the other day that I am an academic. Probably the toughest thing I have at home is an expo marker. But if the Israelis invade, if they charge at us, open door to door to massacre us, I'm going to use that marker, throw it at the Israeli soldiers, even if that is the last thing that I would be able to do. And this is the feeling of everybody. We are helpless. We have nothing to lose.
If you should do anything today to update yourself about what's happening in Palestine, go to Wissam Gaza page. Scroll down until you find these two photos and this video. What you're going to see is a group of Palestinian men and teenage boys in northern Gaza, stripped down to their underwear, sitting on cold pavements. Some of them are already stripped down from their clothes, and others are in the process of taking off their clothes under the threat of Israeli forces. And in another photo, they are being loaded on Israeli military vehicles. And in another photo, they are being lined up in something that seems like a mass grave. These photos were taken by Israeli occupation forces and published by Israeli media. These photos are titled Hamas T-word surrendered in masses. The thing is, Palestinians watching these videos were able to identify their family members. One of whom is Diya Al-Kahlout, a chief bureau correspondent for Al-Arab Al-Jazeera. Diya is a journalist. Diya's sister testified that he was taken at gunpoint from his disabled 7-year-old child. Another one is Hani Al-Madhoun, who was able to identify his family members. Hani's family members were sheltering in UN schools. His nephew Aboud, the one in the white circle, was abducted. His prepubescent nephew Omar was also abducted. This is a photo of his nephew Omar, literally a little boy. Also, he was able to identify his brother Mahmoud in one of the video frames. I am blocking these photos so the video doesn't get taken down, but I posted them on my stories. You can find my account linked to my TikTok profile. He also said that his father was also abducted. And this is a list of some of the people who were able to be identified from the video and the photos. You will find elderly men to little 15-year-old boys. You will find journalists, United Nations staff, and people who work for the UNRWA schools. Another testimony by 40 Palestinian women who said that Israeli occupation forces forced them out of their houses, lined up their husbands, and ended them in front of their eyes. The bottom line is, Israel is not able to make a military success on the ground, so they resorted to abduct civilians. And because Palestinian men have been degraded by Western media outlets, no one will care about them, no one will look for them. The systematic dehumanization of Palestinian men have led us to this point. Terrorizing civilians just because they are Palestinians.
If I did not know Mu'taz's age and I saw this photo, you couldn't convince me that he was actually 24 years old. But this is what happens when it's 61 days of your people being killed, you're documenting all of it, and you have absolutely nowhere to go for safety. And if you haven't seen the video that he posted to his story, he says, in front of Unwa distribution center at the end of my street, thousands of people stand and wait to get something to eat. And we're talking about people who have not eaten for days, probably not weeks, and I guarantee not all of these people are actually going to get food. Now, this is what's happening to Palestinians in the south, but do you know what's happening to the men in the north? I fear if I play the video, then it'll probably get taken down, but I posted it to my IG stories, and these were displaced Palestinian men who were taking shelter in schools. IOF arrested these Palestinian men, abused them, and stripped them of their clothes. It's not only important to talk about what happens to innocent Palestinian women and children, but it's also very important to talk about what is happening to the men. I'm curious if Western media is actually going to cover any of this.
Do you see how it says suspected Hamas? Suspected because they can't prove it, but it is currently being reported that the people that they have tied up like that is journalists, medics, doctors, elderly people that were in the north side of Gaza that did not evacuate. This is one of the journalists that they're holding. He is the chief bureau of the New Arab news channel, and he's one of the people that they're holding hostage. And they're forcing them to kneel on the ground when they strip them naked, so they're kneeling on gravel. This is a humiliation tactic. You can't convince me that the UN is not a part of the Israeli terrorist organization, because what kind of cruelty is this? Why are you giving them toys with food on them when you can barely give them food? They are starving and you think this is...
It is December 7th. I have updates for today. If I miss anything, please comment it. Occupation forces have bombed a mosque in northern Gaza. Israeli forces have struck the Al-Awda Mosque in the Jabaliya refugee camp close to facilities sheltering civilians in northern Gaza. In a separate attack, occupation forces also hit and destroyed the ancient Othman bin Kashgar Mosque in Gaza City's Old City. This mosque was founded in 1223. It was the oldest mosque and archaeological sites in the Gaza Strip. The oldest mosque and archaeological sites in Gaza, destroyed by the occupation forces. That is an attempt to erase a people and their history. That's what that is. Occupation bombardment hit Rafah in southern Gaza. 20 martyrs have ascended in an IOF strike targeting the Al-Houbi family home in the Shabura camp in Rafah in southern Gaza. The occupation forces ordered with a threatening tone to move to Rafah because it is safe, but as of last night, overnight, at least 5 residential homes were targeted and destroyed, and we're talking about a large number of people who were killed. These strikes are not concentrated in one area of Rafah. Multiple locations were targeted, just sending waves of fear and concern that confirm what people have talked about and expressed before. There is literally no safe place in the Gaza Strip, including the areas Israel designated as safe. The Palestinian Red Crescent has said that more than 60% of the wounded need urgent medical care abroad. The occupation forces are deliberately arresting and abusing the sick and wounded, including paramedics from our crews, and we are on the cusp of a health and environmental catastrophe in the Strip. Northern Gaza is facing distressing levels of hunger. 97% of the households in Gaza have inadequate food consumption. Al-Shifa Hospital has no electricity and is only able to give first aid. Al-Shifa Medical Complex used to represent 40 to 50% of the total capacity of operations for the health ministry before the genocide, but now it does not have electricity and it is filled with thousands of displaced people. Yesterday, they received 200 killed and 200 wounded. Most of those injured needed complicated surgeries. Due to a lack of fuel and the closure of hospitals in northern Gaza, the ambulances have come to a standstill. This makes the evacuation of those who are killed and wounded impossible. Spokesperson for the Ministry of Health in Gaza, Dr. Ashraf Al-Qidra, Al-Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis has become overcrowded with about 1,000 wounded, with the injured lying on the ground. Hospitals in northern Gaza are out of service and we are facing difficulties in operating parts of Al-Shifa complex. We will continue attempts to operate any hospital in the Gaza Strip despite the difficulties. The IOF carried out a major massacre in a school shelter in the northern Gaza Strip near the Indonesian hospital. IOF soldiers executed citizens and dozens of bodies remain in the school courtyard, according to eyewitnesses. Yesterday, a similar story emerged with reports of men being executed in front of their families in Al Zaytun in northern Gaza. These harrowing stories were revealed after the widowed wives reached Burej camp in central Gaza due to forced displacement. The families were detained for hours, during which the men were separated and executed in cold blood by the IOF. It should be noted that Egypt has permanently opened the Rafah crossing, and they say that any difficulties that anybody faces in using the crossing is from the Israeli side. So a lot of you who say, oh, well, they should just go to Egypt. Oh, they should just go here. Who's making it difficult for them to do that? I want you guys to keep these things in mind when you are watching the news, because there's just a lot of misinformation flowing about this idea of Palestinians being able to reach some kind of safe zone or any kind of place of safety. Just because you are not dying from a bomb doesn't mean that you aren't going to die from the lack of resources. What we need is a ceasefire, and we need humanitarian aid to reach Gaza in its full capacity. Keep spreading information and keep amplifying the voices that are speaking about Palestine, especially those who are Palestinian. Okay? From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. The UN Security Council is going to meet tomorrow. And that's because UN Chief Antonio Guterres has invoked Article 99. Which basically means forcing the Security Council to address the current situation. But the US is firmly planting their feet against a ceasefire. U.S. envoy to the UN, Robert Wood, told reporters today that Washington's position hasn't changed. The Biden administration has been opposed to a ceasefire, saying such a move benefits Hamas. We again think that the best thing that we can do, all of us, for the situation on the ground is to let the quiet behind-the-scenes diplomacy that's ongoing continue. And that is, we think, the best hope for trying to improve the situation on the ground with regards to humanitarian relief, for getting hostages out, for trying to move forward towards some kind of process. Are you fucking joking? The best thing you can do is call a ceasefire. If you want to get the hostages out and you want to get humanitarian relief to the civilians in Gaza. What the fuck? See, when I tell you guys that when the fucking president and the vice president, all these motherfuckers go on TV, do fucking interviews, whatever the fuck it is, make these fucking statements acting like they give a fuck, and then they do this shit. And then they continue to refuse a ceasefire. The one thing that would stop what's fucking happening. But how can you reason with people that know exactly what they're fucking doing? They know that this is a genocide, and they're completely okay with it. They're willing to fund it. They're willing to be fully complicit in it with their weapons, US weapons being used, bombs being used. And I hope that most of you guys know by now that there is a bill that is trying to be pushed through to aid the Israeli military. Billions and billions of dollars to aid them. But this is military aid, so that doesn't just include money, that includes weapons as well, bombs. 13 U.S. senators are seeking an amendment to a funding bill being pushed by the White House that includes billions of dollars in military aid to Israel. Now, the amendment would require that the weapons received by any country under the proposed national security supplemental are used in accordance with U.S. law, international humanitarian law, and the law of armed conflict. The amendment also would require the president report to the Congress on whether countries receiving military equipment paid for by American taxpayers meet that test. While the statement does not mention Israel directly, calls have been growing in the U.S. to limit or condition military aid to the U.S. ally to force it to do more to protect civilians in its war on Gaza. I think that the government is very much aware of us talking about resisting our war taxes. I think that they're very, very aware that we're not okay with where our money is going. Now, they're going to do shit like that to quiet us down or whatever, but they're still refusing a ceasefire, like I said, with that initial article. So it doesn't matter if they talk about, oh, international humanitarian law, U.S. law, whatever the fuck, because Israel's already been breaking all of that with, past military aid from the U.S. They've already been doing that shit. It's crazy to me that now they want to implement that fucking rule. And it's only because we've been loud as fuck and we've been angry as fuck. But that's why we don't stop. This is not going to suffice. This is not enough. No, we want a fucking ceasefire. This is not good enough. We don't even want any of that fucking military aid to get there to begin with. We don't give a fuck. They should not be supplied with these things at this point. They have broken law after law. They have committed atrocities in Gaza. They are not deserving of any kind of fucking aid. And that is why we have to keep talking. We have to keep yelling at the top of our fucking lungs and amplifying voices and letting them know that that's not enough.
That's not enough. We want a fucking ceasefire. It's not good enough that they're still going to send aid and send weapons to a place where a genocide is being committed and then expect that military and that government to act within humanitarian law. And you want to know what the White House aide John Feiner just said today? You want to know? He said that the U.S. has not given a firm deadline to Israel to end its military operations in Gaza. It's not really our role. This is their conflict. That said, we do have influence, even if we don't have ultimate control over what happens on the ground in Gaza. We are trying to use our influence to steer that conflict in the most constructive, in our view, way possible. Some of the most violent attacks since October 7th have happened in just the past few days. Some of the most heinous, fucked up atrocities have fucking happened at the hands of the IOF and the Israeli government and the US government in the last few days. And that's the fucking response.
There is no place in Gaza that is safe. People in the north and the south are being bombed, and now Israel is pushing the people of Palestine, which is more than 1.8 million people, in a small area called Al-Mawasi, right? It's literally an airport size. Like, think of an airport. Imagine all these people, in millions of people in that type of area, squeezed together. No food, no water, no type of anything, no help. And basically expect those people, like, telling them that that's a safe area. They can stay there. The place is super close to the Rafah crossing, which is next to the border of Egypt. So a lot of them are just camping there, as you can see, and there's more. This is the area. That's the size of the place right here. And that's what they deem to be safe. And it's not safe, because if these people are not being bombed, guess what? Disease is spreading. 1.8 million people cooped up in an airport-sized environment. No toilets, no water, no food, no sanitation, none of that. People are gonna die from diseases. You know, all kinds of things are gonna break out in these areas. Literally, if they're not unaliving them with bombs, they're being unalived by diseases and all kinds of health situations. This is what they're doing. Slowly but surely, they're trying to wipe out the Palestinians with all kinds of things. Also, Bisan made a video on Instagram stating that the women have no sanitary pads. There's nothing for them to use when they are on their menstrual cycle. And the aid that is actually going into Gaza, there's no sanitary pads or anything from women's menstrual cycle in those trucks. Because, again, they need water, they need food, they need everything. And the women are being forgotten. You know what I mean? And it's like, this is dangerous. This is infections. This can... so many things can go wrong. So many things. And this is what the IDF, this is what the Israeli government wants. This is what they want. They want them to be unalive slowly but surely with all kinds of infections, with all kinds of diseases. And this is what's happening to these people. Men, women, children, everybody is being affected.
Ismail Jude, he's a photojournalist in Gaza, has posted his last message. He said,
I don't think anyone is surprised when a Zionist responds that way to civilian photojournalists saying their goodbyes. 60 plus of their colleagues have already been murdered, and killing journalists is a war crime. That attitude just echoes the attitudes of the IOF, the most moral army in the world, who has a proposal on the school, which you can see in the background has so much damage, and over 7,000 children have been and will never go to school again. It's the same attitude when an IOF puts a prayer rug where he defecates, puts that defecation in a bag and throws it into a neighborhood. It's the same attitude of people who are watching Gaza from afar and clap when many beautiful Jewish creators have spoken on the indoctrination from childhood of Zionists to conflate Zionism and Judaism, that Muslims, that Arabs, that Palestinians hate them. And so I understand that they have been indoctrinated to dehumanize Palestinians. This attitude is what makes it justifiable for an old man to stab his tenant and her child 26 times until he murders a 6-year-old boy for being Palestinian in America. It's what makes it justifiable in someone's head to shoot 3 college students. It's what makes it justifiable a peaceful protest for Palestine, where there was a 5-year-old and a grown man took a shovel and beat that 5-year-old. But I think really the question I have is, what makes you so afraid, so hateful of the idea of Jews and Muslims and Christians who lived together in Palestine for centuries before the creation? What is so terrifying that internally you would have to turn to such a hateful response when talking about the idea of mourning civilian life?
People in Gaza aren't just experiencing death and bombing. They're experiencing the smell of dust every time an airstrike hits. They're experiencing the smell of feces due to the lack of water and functioning bathrooms. They're experiencing the smell of blood and death. They're experiencing the sounds of people screaming, of people being stuck under the rubble. They are experiencing unimaginable circumstances, stuff none of us could ever handle, not even for a second. So the journalists are documenting the mass destruction of their homeland during all these unimaginable circumstances, of the loss of their loved ones, of their relatives, of their friends, of their educational institutions. I want you guys to understand really what it means for them to go out and document this while experiencing what they're experiencing. Like, there's a lot of us on the other side of this, watching from afar, and we feel paralyzed. We feel like we can't go on with our day-to-day life because of how sad and how disturbing and how upsetting everything we're seeing is. And they are seeing it firsthand, and they are feeling it and smelling it and hearing it, and they are still going on to show the world. They're still doing their jobs. They're still doing more than any of us could ever under those conditions, because we wouldn't even be able to last a second.
It's important when we talk about Palestine to talk also about the Palestinian Christians who have lived in these lands for years. The Palestinians were Muslims, Jews, and Christians. So let's dig in the history of the Christians of Palestine. Beit Lahem in Palestine is where Christianity was formed. That was the home of Jesus. That's where he came from. In 2016, 170,000 Christians lived in occupied Palestine. 80% of them were Arab Palestinians who are indigenous to the land of Palestine. 51,000 lived in the West Bank and 3,500 in Gaza Strip. Other than the Palestinian Christians who were forced displacement in 1948, which their total comes to around 2 million Palestinian Christians in the whole world who were displaced, and those numbers are according to the year 2000. The Palestinian Christians are 20% of the Palestinian population around the world, who are everywhere in the world, especially the West and South America. That's because of the displacement in 1948 and the occupation struggles which forced them to leave their homelands. So when we talk about Palestine, the land of religions, we are not just talking about Muslims. This is not a fight between Muslims and Jews. It is not. It is a fight between occupied Palestine and the Palestinians who are Muslim, Jews, and Christians against the Zionist entity, the Zionist way of thinking, which is not Jews. The Zionist way of thinking is a political movement that was formed around 1917, and a lot of Jews followed it. So when we talk about Zionism, we are talking about all Zionists are Jews, but not all Jews are Zionists.
Let's talk about one of the most unjust cases in the US, and it has to do with Palestine. 15 years ago, 5 Palestinian American men were arrested and charged for feeding orphans in Palestine, and their convictions range from 15 to 65 years. This video is about the Holy Land Foundation 5. There are 3 things about this case that really stand out to me. So the first thing that stands out that was completely unfounded is accusing the Zakat charities throughout Palestine that they were donating to and working with for supporting Hamas. But the weird thing about this is that the US government works with NGOs in America that also work with these same organizations throughout Palestine. There's no evidence behind it. Number 2 is that an anonymous witness was allowed to remain anonymous throughout the entire trial. He was an Israeli intelligence officer that claimed that he had evidence or that he knew that they were somehow funding Hamas. But again, there was zero evidence for it, and because he remained anonymous, they weren't allowed to ask him questions correctly. Number 3 is that the Israeli government had 8,000 documents accusing the Holy Land Five, but the US government didn't even have one. Also, opening this case was pushed by the ADL, which is the Anti-Defamation League, which is incredibly pro-Israel, AIPAC, the Jewish lobby, which is also incredibly pro-Israel, Chuck Schumer, who is also incredibly pro-Israel. And you might ask yourself, why would the US government want to shut down this foundation? Because it changes the narrative about Palestine and Palestinians. And they were used as a scapegoat because it was right after Bush's War on Terror. There's literally zero evidence that connects the Holy Land Foundation with supporting or funding Hamas. And there's a couple things that we can actually do to help free these men. First, I recommend following the Instagram page that was started by their daughters. There's an Al Jazeera documentary about this as well, which gives the details of the case, especially because there was 2 trials. Number 3, talk to organizers in your area about talking about them at protests. Post about them on your social medias. Israeli author Miko Peled also wrote a book about this. If we want them to get exonerated and reunited with their families, we need to be raising public awareness about this. When we say free every single Palestinian political prisoner, we mean it. From Palestine to the US.
The Western media wants us to perceive Palestinians in one of 2 ways. Either they are terrorists or they are victims. And in order for them to receive any of our empathy, they have to be the perfect victims. And I thought a lot about the recent interview of the woman from Sex and the City on The View, and they were discussing what was happening in Gaza. And when they were discussing what was happening in Gaza, she was speaking specifically about the women and children and elderly and the innocent people who were dying in Gaza and how devastating it was. And then they shift the conversation to Hamas, and immediately they all start to condemn Hamas. And it made me think about how these are the only 2 ways that Palestinians exist in our minds. And there's no room for gray area. You know, the members of this organization are not allowed to have the mic. In fact, anytime videos emerge of these members speaking up, you know, social media and tries to silence them. You know, they take them down. And I thought a lot about this article that Mohammed El-Kurd wrote for The Nation. It's an excellent article. Everyone should read it. And he was talking about these 2 brothers. Their names were Jawad and Thafer Rimawi. Both of the brothers lived in the West Bank, and they were well respected. One of the brothers had a high-paying job working at a bank, and the other one was a computer engineer at Birzeit University. One day, the Israeli occupation came to their village, which it illegally occupies, and they came to raid it. And the 2 brothers went to defend their village. How, you ask? By throwing rocks and stones at the occupation who came in with guns and tanks. Both of the brothers were killed immediately, within minutes of each other. Their sister, who is a doctor, has been trying to advocate to the world that her brothers were killed unjustly. She's trying to convince the world that her brother's lives matter. So Mohammed El-Kurd and her tried to write an article, and they went to The Guardian, the Los Angeles Times, and I believe the Washington Post. And all of these publications denied and refused their request to write this article about these 2 brothers. Why? Because the brothers threw rocks at the occupation. They were not the perfect victims. So not only does the Western media try to convince us that Palestinians can exist on our mind in one of 2 ways, which is the terrorist and the victim, they also try to convince the masses that the people who speak up for Palestinians on social media are not reliable sources. We're not credited just because we are too emotional. We cry, we curse, we're not professional. Despite the fact that some of us have actually been to Palestine and lived in Palestine, which is something that their journalists have never done. You know, they're never present when the Israeli army comes and raids refugee camps and villages all throughout the West Bank and kills, dozens of innocent people. But to me, the lack of human emotions when talking about a genocide, occupation, apartheid, it then only fuels the genocide further, and it lacks the dire need to end the genocide. And that's when I believe that the Western media is not only a racist entity, but they are participating in this genocide and all the other genocides that are happening right now in the world.
For every 30 minutes that someone watches TikTok, every day they become 17% more
Habibi John, and where are these numbers from? Me, when I try to make up random stuff just to pass my presentation in like 5th grade. They're getting so desperate that people are actually talking about what is going on and the truth about what is going on. It's not even just enough for them to say, oh, criticizing the government in Israel is anti-Semitic. They are now saying that you using the app, the TikTok app, is anti-Semitic. And I'm the first to admit my own faults, and I know that I'm, not the best at math, but riddle me this. If every 30 minutes on TikTok you become 17% more anti-Semitic, does that mean that like after a full day on TikTok, you're 100%? But hey, them being so desperate literally shows that, they know that they're failing. Everything they try to tell you, they're failing at. They know they're not going to be successful anymore, so they're grasping at straws and also even failing at that.
Just your daily reminder that Joe Biden can end this bombardment of Gaza literally anytime he wants, because he's already set a deadline for the beginning of next year. So he wants to keep this killing and this mass murder going for as long as he possibly can without jeopardizing his re-election.
Zionists will say that the men that are being tortured right now are Hamas. Media will run with this narrative. No one will force them to prove that these are Hamas. Relatives of the kidnapped men will come out and tell you who these men are. Will show you that they are regular civilians. It will show you evidence. It will show you proof. They already are starting to come out and show who has been kidnapped from their family. Nobody will care. Western media will not report this. Western media will not show you that. They will report the lies that Zionists are running with, the lies that they have to make up to justify this. Tale as old as time. Palestinians deserve justice. They deserve liberation. They deserve to resist.
The Israeli occupation forces went into a UN school in the north of Gaza, where people were sheltering and trying to protect themselves from the carpet bombings, innocent civilians. And they rounded up any man that was over the age of 15. And they stripped them of their clothes in the dead of winter. And they blindfolded them, and they tied their hands behind their back, and they lined them up in rows. And they told any woman who was related to them to run away. Get out and tell others. And they took videos of it and they posted it on their news channel as a win. And if we even mention certain things related to Palestine, not only do we get censored and blocked, our channels get removed, and they took them and we don't even know where they are. And there are people on Twitter saying, this is my brother Mahmoud. This is my dad. He's a shop owner. He is this. And we know for a fact that when they go and they imprison these innocent civilians, the same things happen and they're being starved to death. And I don't understand. I don't understand how much more it's going to take. I really don't. Because we've seen these images before, and I was looking at my Instagram archive yesterday because I was trying to remember when was the hospital bombing? Like, when was that image of the press conference with the bodies around them? And that was October 17th. It is the 7th of December, and they're doing these things without any shame. Like, they continue, and it keeps getting worse. The numbers keep going up. And we can't even show a picture of it. Like, I can't even post it because my account will get taken down, even though I have 2 followers. And that drives me so crazy. And I don't know what to do.
2 months, and we are still watching the genocide, the erasure, the torture of Palestinian Muslims and Christians in Gaza. A ceasefire is so far out of the minds of the United States and Israel that in the midst of the screaming, crying desperation of dying Palestinians, U.S. Congress is passing, ruling that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. That's what you're focused on? Attacking freedom of speech? And viewing anyone who speaks up for the Palestinian genocide as someone who's promoting Jewish genocide? It's still about you. You can be the one committing the genocide, and you're still the victim? No one gives a shit that you're Jewish. You are torturing, harassing, oppressing, bombing Palestinian lives. So proudly walk into Gaza with your flags of the Star of David, only to bomb the oldest church in the world, only to use Muslim praying mats to sit in front of the toilet. You go into the houses of Palestinian modest women to reveal their clothes, their undergarments, and call them. And today we have naked Palestinian men being arrested, handcuffed, and sitting on the streets in humiliation in front of their women and children that haven't been killed yet. And the conversation in this country right now is about Jewish victimhood and genocide. Your little demonic children are all over TikTok, dancing and celebrating, wearing hijabs, drawing unibrows and coloring in their teeth to mock the dying Palestinian Muslim women crying over their dead children. And we're the terrorists. We're the terrorists. You mock my hijab. You curse my prophet. You insult and use my scripture. You step on, spit, and burn my holy book. You insult my God. You kill my people.
If the Palestinians didn't want all of this to happen, they would have never voted Hamas in. The entire half of the population that's under the age of like 34 who wasn't alive or old enough to vote back then definitely should not have voted Hamas in. Those fucking assholes. You know, this whole narrative of yours is getting old. It's like you forget that October 7th happened. You support Hamas. It's like, do you not care about Jewish lives? I don't know how to explain to you that this is not about Jewish lives. Israel has pushed Palestinians into the south of Gaza through indiscriminate bombing campaigns. And now they're telling them to leave the south of Gaza. Where are they supposed to go? I'm sure they can figure it out. It's like they brought this upon themselves. There are videos of children dying in the rubble, parents crying for their children, children crying for their parents, animals that doesn't do anything for you. We're watching like destruction on a whole unimaginable level, and that's all you can say? That's just the cost of war. I don't see you talking about Israeli deaths. Why do you do this every single time? Can't you just look at the fact that thousands of children are dying and be like, that's sad and that shouldn't be happening? Is that so hard? Well, what about October 7th? I don't understand how you can do this. I don't understand how you can see what's going on and just say, that's okay. How these reporters who have been following since day one are writing goodbye letters because they don't know if they're gonna make it to the next day. Meanwhile, there's videos of IDF soldiers just playing in the rubble, riding bicycles, taking their things, going through their personal items in the homes. That doesn't remind you of anything? Yeah, it reminds me of October 7th. And I'm getting real tired of you being a Hamas sympathizer. Like, you're supporting terrorists. I don't know how else I'm supposed to explain to you that you should give a shit about people being alive and having rights and not being murdered in their homes and not being treated like they aren't worth saving. I don't know how else I'm supposed to explain to you that you should care about Jewish people.
I want you to follow with me the cycle of basically Zionist propaganda. We can start anywhere on this cycle, but let's use the first top part over here, fake a major attack, and let's use October 7th. So they faked a major attack. They gain people's sympathy. So faking an attack can be also a real attack that's been exaggerated, or, for example, they knew what was going to happen and then they ignored it. Gain people's sympathy through exaggerated statistics. First of all, when that event happened on October 7th, they said 1,400 unalived by Hamas. As the days went on, that number not only went down, but the ones that were unalived by Hamas were no longer just unalived by Hamas, they were also unalived by the IDF. But then we saw right away, they started comparing this to the second Holocaust, or this is equivalent to the 9/11. And then they use that to justify an invasion of the enemy. Because they're invading, and because we set the precedent already that this is a 9/11 or a Holocaust, and that Israel has a right to defend itself, then you do the total annihilation of innocent enemy. A total annihilation is just very hard to conceal, and like I said before, there's no flag big enough to cover these heinous war crimes. So then people start researching and they see that, maybe not everything that was happening here is actually true, then they label it as anti-Semitism starts to rise, when in reality it's just people waking up to the truth and criticizing the Israeli government. So what happens? They either fake another attack, or they start fabricating different stories from the first original attack. Like now they're talking about the violence towards women from October 7th that was ignored for 2 months, but then all of a sudden is now major headlines.
We never stop. I don't give a fuck who's listening or who ain't listening. We do this underground shit. It's called life.
Hey, buddy! Squidward! Free cleaning service? Census taker? Good day, kind sir. Would you like to buy some Gill Scout cookies?
Killing is bad. No killing. Killing hurts people. Lying is also bad. Lying hurts people. But lying is not as bad as killing. Now, which one is older? The iPad Pro or the very first iPod? The very first iPod. Now, which one is older? 2023 or 1948? 1948. Let's go over this again. Killing is bad. Killing is what? Exactly. Killing hurts people. Lying is also bad. Lying hurts people. But lying is not as bad as killing. Thank you.
Fuck these corrupt politicians who steal from their people and don't represent them. I said it, we fight for our rights and it's anti-Semitic. You think after being oppressed they would get it, yeah.
Be nice. I'm finding it. It take you that long to find it?
It does. Israel's terror cannot be reformed, and if you believe in Israel's right to exist, you believe in the death, destruction, and displacement of the Palestinian people. And for you to assume that our calls for freedom are declarations of barbaric violence says more about you than it does about us, which is that you assume us to be monsters, because you're giving legitimacy to Israel's heavily funded 75-year-long propaganda campaign that works very hard to dehumanize us. And how dare anybody weaponize the word peace against us and interrogate us with it, as if we are the ones who haven't been denied that basic human right for the past 75 years. We are not victims that need saving. We are a people working for the collective liberation of everybody from colonialism and Zionism, inclusive of their religion, ethnicity, and race. While the horrors in Gaza continue to unfold in worse ways every single day, Israel is violently and forcibly displacing Palestinians in the West Bank, as they have been for the past 75 years. We don't need anybody's lecture on peace and liberation. We need your solidarity. We will not be silenced, and we will not be exterminated.
Don't forget that it's not just about free Palestine, but the Palestine that's freeing us along the way.